We'll get rolling here. I think this is episode. What the hell episode is this? 13? Man, it's hard to keep up.
Yeah.
We've got Mark here from Michigan, and
So,
we are going to talk about being outsiders from hip hop and coming from a rock perspective and dropping into hip hop, which has been a great experience for me. And Mark, I'm going to let you kick us off, man, and you can talk about your journey and we'll go from there.
okay, so I'd say I got into hip hop in about 20. Well, I started listening to it in about 2019 is when I
Okay.
started delving into it a little bit, but I fully got into it in 2020, like early 2020. So, before my kind of music taste between them was mostly like rock, and what I listened to mostly was Beatles
Oh,
was my
okay.
main thing. And I like the Beatles, Billy Joel.
So you're
Um,
coming from the classic rock area.
yeah. I listened to some experimental stuff. Like I hadn't fully gotten into Radiohead, but I listened to some Radiohead. What else is like
Do you want?
ELO, Electric Light Orchestra?
I've heard of them. I don't think I've ever taken the time to listen to them. They're pretty like there's a pretty big group, right? Like it's a full orchestra.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I listened to them. I listened to like some just mostly I just listened to random stuff. I didn't listen to much albums actually. Well, I listened to all the Beatles albums, but I didn't listen to much albums. It was just kind of just like skipping from song to song. But once I got into hip hop, I started doing just straight albums. So mostly when I was listening to rock, I was just going song to song and kind of just like listening to what matches the same
Sure.
genre. But
Yeah.
then I had a friend who introduced me to hip hop through Kanye was the first one I got into, right?
Okay.
And
Which
we actually
album?
saw college dropout.
Okay.
So we have because I have a podcast with my friends
Uh huh.
where where we listen to albums and then we talk about them. So he recommended College Dropout. So that was kind of my first like well, it was College Dropout slash because of the internet. So it was both of those. And it kind of like when I listened to College Dropout, it was like this big like moment where it was kind of just like this is what rap could be because I
Okay.
didn't really experience rap that much. Like I'd heard it on the radio and stuff obviously, but I hadn't really like listened to a full album and gotten that experience. So once I listened to College Dropout, it kind of just like opened my eye and made me realize this is what hip hop could be. And then I kept listening to Kanye, obviously, but then over time I started getting into more and more different artists as time went on. So I think then after that I got into Kid Cudi.
Oh, sure. Of course. Yeah. If you're on the Kanye train, then Kid Cudi is kind of a next
Yeah.
step.
Then it was like the obvious stuff like Ty. I got into Tyler and then Kendrick and then Tribe Called Quest, and then I just kind of started getting into everyone, and now it's just like I still listen to hip. Like I'd say my music taste is still like 50% hip hop, 50% rock. So I still listen. It's not like I abandoned my rock taste. Like I still listen to rock a good amount. Even if you look in my like Spotify like songs, I have a lot of rock songs in there and
Yeah.
like R&B and stuff. But definitely something that made me get into hip hop is that I find the hip hop it can incorporate sounds from every genre. It can take sounds from even rock inspired sounds, especially on like Twisted Fantasy, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. There's definitely influences from rock on that album that you can pull through, and like To Pimp a Butterfly, there's a lot of funk and jazz
Yeah.
taken
Yeah.
from other genres. So when you just pull these elements together, it can make it interesting. As someone who's never listened to hip hop before, you go into it and you think, "Oh, that's kind of familiar to me. That sounds kind of familiar to me," and it can draw you in. And eventually, you can kind of just get used to the sound, to where you don't have to think, "Oh, this sounds like this." You can just fully realize this is hip hop, and you don't have to take from other genres.
Yeah, and it is really neat in the sense that hip hop can do that. It can exist in almost any sound space. Whereas
Yeah.
you get into other genres and it's just they can't do it for whatever reason. And I mean, there are some genres, you know, you get some of the rap rock, like Rage Against the Machine or Limp Bizkit had their thing going on like that too. There's other bands as well, but
Like Linkin Park, I think.
yeah, Linkin Park is probably a better example than Limp Bizkit. But has been very interesting to me to as I explore more of these artists and albums and sounds. It's like, yeah, holy shit! Like when I listened to Cherry Bomb, I was like, this is an industrial metal album, but Tyler's rapping on top of it. Like, it just blew me away, the sound that he was using there.
It really, Cherry Bomb especially, because it's so aggressive.
Yeah.
And I think, especially because when you jump right into Death Camp definitely has, like, the guitar on that song is very, like, aggressive and has that kind of rock feel. So it can draw you in through that, because I think ever since then, that's really the only time Tyler's gone, like, rock. Now he's more, seems, jazz.
Yeah.
He incorporates jazz, especially on, like, Igor and stuff like that. Like, jazz and soul really is what he drives from. So it's still, like, you can take elements from genres and put them together in hip-hop, especially through sampling.
Yeah.
Because a lot of artists will sample rock songs, and they'll pull them together. So as a non-rock fan, it can make it easy to get into hip-hop if you go into it and you can go, oh, I recognize this. Oh, this sounds kind of familiar. This guitar sounds kind of like a rock song. But as you go more into hip-hop, you can just fully embrace it for what it is than having to pull from other genres, which is what I found. So now I fully embrace hip-hop as, like, I don't really need to worry about other stuff. I can just fully enjoy it as its own thing. And I don't really know when that clicked. Do you know when you... Well, I think I remember watching one of your videos, like, it was, like, Gone off Late Registration. You said something clicked, but I don't remember what you said.
I don't, that was a while ago. Gone was really probably one of the first tracks. I was like, holy shit, I really, really like this song. Like, I think it was just because of the music that was being used with the piano, with the strings, with the cool little beat that was going on. And I think maybe for me, it was something where, okay, here's a song that I really like, and they're using instruments that I really like, and it doesn't seem like it's leaning on a sample. Like that, at that point, I was still pretty early in exploring hip-hop, and so I still had this idea in my mind of, okay, everyone's still kind of leaning on samples and using samples, but this felt like an original beat, original music throughout, and it's just incredible song.
I think that once it fully clicked for me, what I realized I loved about hip-hop was when I was either listening to... It could have been because of the internet, because that was also the same time I listened to College Dropout. I also realized the storytelling possibilities in hip-hop.
Yeah.
And the ways that they're able to incorporate so many different elements of different genres and pull together different stories, especially because of the backgrounds that a lot of people come from.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see where they come from in that element, and the way that... Especially because you haven't listened because of the internet, right?
Not yet. I really want to get to that one.
So they're able to use, I guess Good Kid, Mad City is a better example because you've listened to that. So how that uses storytelling, and To Pimp a Butterfly. Really, Kendrick does all types of storytelling.
Yeah.
But the way you can incorporate storytelling into hip hop, because like I said before, it incorporates so many different genres. And that can make it really interesting to create like a sound space to make it immersive. Because To Pimp a Butterfly is like so many different things to put like a big fusion of everything.
Yeah.
So it kind of creates something that's unlike anything else. So it's able to pull you into this world of To Pimp a Butterfly, and then the lyrics are just like incredible. That's probably my favorite written hip hop album.
That's something I've come to really, really love. As somebody who loves lyrics to begin with, I'm noticing that when you compare rock to hip hop lyrically, especially in terms of the amount of lyrics, there's no comparison. Yeah. Like so many rock songs, I love the songs, I love the lyrics, I love singing to them and all this other stuff, but there's probably like 30-40% of the lyrics that exists in the typical hip hop song, because some of these verses that these guys go on, they just tear, man. And it's like, the word count's probably like 1,500, where you get to some of these rock songs, it's like, they got like 300 words, they're not saying much there.
Yeah. And that can lead you. That's also something I like about hip hop. It's easier to return to them and to delve more deep into them because since it's fast and there's more words, sometimes you'll miss something. And then you'll go back and delve more into that certain phrase or something that you may have missed. Because with rock songs, you can miss something, but it's usually slower, so you can pick up on things faster.
Yeah.
With hip hop, since it's moving so fast, and especially in Kendrick, because he just puts like
Oh my
every phrase matters.
Yeah.
Like once you listen to Pimp a Butterfly, you need to listen to that thing like 2 or 3 more times to fully take in everything.
Right. And then buy the book series that helps explain it to you with full annotations.
Yeah. If that's the thing about hip hop is it can incorporate so much meaning because since they use so much more words usually, they can put so much more, cram it into every sentence. So when you return to it, you can keep listening to it and keep figuring out stuff that it means until you finally have this full idea of what it means. Especially with like Kendrick and like just all these people that incorporate so much meaning into their words.
Yeah, and this is why I've always enjoyed, because listening to rock for 30 years, I always enjoyed the album format. I liked a good album because it's like, okay, now they can, not necessarily, not every album is a story, but they can tell me more throughout this album experience. Because from song to song, because there aren't a lot of words, it's like, yeah, okay, we just need a little bit more time to really tell a broader story. Whereas hip hop, sometimes it can be one song and it's like, holy shit, that one song just told a whole story. So it's really incredible how much more is being told in a hip hop album compared to a rock album.
Especially on like, if we're talking about Pimp Butterfly, like How Much a Dollar Costs.
Yes.
That's like a whole story.
It's a whole story
in one song.
Yeah.
The story with him and the homeless man. But even though it's its own story, it still fits into the large story of To Pimp a Butterfly. It's not like it's separate
Yeah.
from the story as a whole.
And then you almost get the reverse effect too, where because there's so much story in the album, if you listen to one song by itself and you don't have the context, that song like Sing For Me, I'm Dying of Thirst off of Good Kid, Mad City, that's an incredible song, huge song.
Yeah.
But if you just kind of listen to it by itself, like, yeah, you'll get the power and the impact from it. But if you take that out of the album, if you haven't listened to the rest of the album up to that point, you lose a lot of the power that comes with that track at that time.
Still the full, like, because once you've heard the rest of the album, once you make it to that, it hits even harder because once you know the context of the rest of the album as a whole and how that fits in. And then something else, because we're talking about a lot of like lyric heavy hip hop, there's still hip hop where it's more just leaning on energy.
Yeah.
Like, let's say like Playboy Cardi, because like that doesn't have as much meaning as like To Pimp a Butterfly, or as deep as that. It's mainly focused on just trying to like pump you up, kind of. Yeah, that's also another side of hip hop where it's just focused on like pure energy.
Yeah, and I
really enjoy.
I think this is where rock is still king, in my opinion, especially when you get into metal. Like, I think so. I think so. Like, I really enjoyed Wu-Tang and the energy that they brought, and my wife and I'm almost done with the Hip Hop Evolution series on Netflix. And last night we watched the episode with Lil Jon, and they're just talking about Kronk and getting the club hyped and tear down the club and all this shit. And it's like, yeah, that's cool, the energy. But I feel like with that, go watch the Metallica live performance in Russia from back in the 90s. There was like 500,000 people in the crowds. Go watch the AC/DC live concert in, I think, Rio de Janeiro or something like that, where it's just fucking gangbusters. Like, from beginning to end, everyone's losing their mind. Like, rock and metal, when it comes to energy, in my opinion, it's still unmatched. Yeah. I could be in my car driving to work at 6:30 in the morning. I'm tired as shit, and I put on Sepultura and I just ignite, like, boom. Man, it's great. It's great.
Well, let me ask you this as your background, but what's like, okay, give me your top 5 favorite rock albums of all time then.
Of all time, top 5? Hell, I don't know, dude. So one of them that comes to mind immediately is an EP by Alice in Chains, Jar of Flies. Love that album. Okay. Yeah. Pink Floyd, Animals is probably one of my favorite albums of all time. I mean, Tool, it probably takes 2 of those slots. So just pick any of the Tool. No, I mean, Enema is an amazing album. I've got 9 Inch Nails, Downward Spiral sitting in front of me right now just because I had it out. I mean, there's so many rock albums that I just love. And
Or-
it's hard to pick five because I mean, I've got 300 CDs sitting in my room right now.
Yeah, I'd probably say for rock, I really well, my favorite album of all time is OK Computer
That one's
for
good.
Radiohead.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
one's good.
I have. Let me think. Have you listened to any Gorillas?
Not really. I remember listening to I think it was their first album that has what is it, Clint Eastwood or something
Yeah,
like that.
that's
Yeah.
that one. Yep.
But I didn't
Be-
listen to it a lot. I'm not overly familiar with it.
So they also kind of do they do a fusion of rock and hip hop where they incorporate many different genres, but it's mostly like experimental rock, but they have hip hop elements in it, especially with the production, and they'll have like there's a Gorilla song with MF Doom on it.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, and that's also something that could help someone get into hip hop is that there are groups, which we kind of touched on earlier, but there's like rock groups that have hip hop elements.
Yeah.
So that can also be used to bridge the gap. Because if you listen to a rock song, which you're like a rock group, which you're mostly familiar with, but then they incorporate elements of hip hop, it can kind of bring you more familiar with that type of music, and then you can just fully listen to hip hop eventually.
Yeah.
Which is something because that works as an adjustment for some people. Because I there are probably some people who grew up listening to hip hop and then maybe had to adjust to rock.
Yeah, this is why I'm always preaching Rage Against the Machine as the super highway between rock and hip hop because
Yeah.
Rage Against the Machine from a rock standpoint fucking kills it, and from a hip hop standpoint, Zach De La Rocha is killing it on the lyrics. Like, and it's got these beefy, fat bass lines that people can get into, and Tom Morello is doing all these creative, amazing sounds with the guitar. Like, I just feel like anybody who's trying to cross over to the other side, that is the road to take. Rage Against the Machine.
A good way to cross over into that genre as a whole. And I think that a way that rock, well, I guess not necessarily rock, but some type of like folk I find can also be very lyrically heavy
Yeah.
because folk is usually more slow, but it's usually more like poetic.
Mm-hmm.
Like something like Elliott Smith or something like that.
I don't know a lot of folk music. I don't know Elliott Smith, but I
Yeah.
would say I'm familiar
Dylan.
with First Aid Kit. I really like the Lumineers. I enjoy. I guess Mumford and Son would be considered folk music. There's some of the older stuff anyway. I don't have a huge range on folk music, but the stuff I've listened to, I have enjoyed.
What do you think? Because we're talking about bridging the gap, what would you say is a rap album that you've listened to that you think would be a great first album for someone who's into rock to listen to?
That's kind of tough. That one's kind of tough because I feel like one of the reasons that's made it easier for me to cross over into hip hop is the fact that I have a lot of techno background too.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm familiar and enjoy a lot of those electronic synthetic sounds. And so like when I listened to Man on the Moon 1, oh, I was right at home. Like this sounds great. I'm totally into this. You get into some of this crazy shit like JPEG Mafia's Veteran album.
Or like Death Grips.
Death Grips, like it's just wild. But again, I was still comfortable because I was used to those. I listened to Aphex Twin, and he's just got some of the craziest electronic shit I've ever heard, man. Just wild. And so I was still kind of comfortable there.
I would say Death Grips would be a good start to someone if someone who's into like very heavy like rock and metal because that's the kind of energy they push out. Like sometimes MC Ride is going like insane on those tracks, just exuding this energy, and they have like some insane drums in their songs.
Yeah.
So that could be like one. I also say maybe Twisted Fantasy because I think that it has a type of atmosphere which is easy to get into even if you haven't listened to a lot of hip hop. And I've heard a lot of people say that Twisted Fantasy got them into Kanye and got them into this thing. But I would also say that 808s would be a good one.
Yeah,
because especially if you're into like like techno or like more electronic because that incorporates that, and there's not like a ton of rap on it, but it can introduce you to Kanye
Yeah,
through
that's
that.
really the struggle is it all depends on where the other person is coming from musically. And
Yeah.
then the biggest barrier, I feel the biggest barrier is the rapping itself. And
Really?
yeah, because like you were saying before, it's very fast.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of things being said. I still remember vividly, and it still happens sometimes too, of okay, this guy's going and going and going, and he's making all of these like pop culture references or references to artists I don't know or producers I don't know, clothing lines I don't know. And so there was a huge language barrier there and just not understanding who they're talking about. And then there's all the slang that gets mixed into it, which is another layer of, language barrier. So sometimes I think all of those elements combined, the speed, which is happening,
Yeah.
not being used to that, because if you're coming from the rock world, you're used to somebody singing. There's a little bit more harmony, a little bit more melody
Yeah,
in the
yeah, yeah.
voice, where these guys are just da 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 da.
Hmm.
And then sometimes it sounds like they're just saying the craziest shit you've ever heard in your life.
Yeah.
So it takes a while to push through. It took me a while to push through that barrier, just the language, and not so much bad language, but the way the words are coming out, the speed, the complexity, the references, all of that stuff,
Yeah.
the slang. That is a huge hurdle to hop over.
Do you feel that you've overcome that in any way?
Yeah, I feel a lot more comfortable now. A lot more comfortable.
You did because what was the first album you did again?
I think that the first full album reaction I did was "Call Me If You Get Lost," but I was listening to only Tyler at that time. I hadn't listened to anybody else, and
Okay,
so
yeah.
I was
I know
pretty.
that was your introduction.
Yeah, that was
Was
my
Tyler.
first full album, but I still felt pretty safe because I trusted Tyler at that point. Like I knew he was a good artist, and even though this was a new album that had just come out, I was like, no, this will be solid.
Mm.
I
Do you
think
know
the I
how
think
long do you think it took you to get over that barrier of language barrier?
a whole lot of red really pushed that for me.
Oh yeah.
That was a tough one. That was really tough just to hear. I'd never heard anything like that in terms of vocal use. I'd never
Hmm.
heard anything like that. Tupac helped a lot. Tupac helped a lot. The Me Against the World album, because at that point it was still really early in my journey, and I had all these misconceptions on what rap was about and what they were saying in their songs. And Tupac came in and just blew all that shit out. Like, basically showed me that everything that he was talking about was the opposite of what I perceived it to be. So that helped
Yeah.
a lot. And then of course Kendrick. Kendrick's such a great writer and such a great storyteller. Good Kid, Mad City really, really pulled me in. That album was huge for me. I really liked that one.
I can really pull anyone in with the writing, regardless of where you come from,
It's just a
because of that.
fantastic story.
Mhm. It's almost like watching a movie. Well, because I think it says on the one of the album covers, it says like "Good Kid, Mad City," a short film.
Yeah, right.
It
I think
calls
it
it.
does. Yeah, I think you're right.
It's because especially with the interludes that it plays with like the friends in the car and with like the woman they meet,
Yeah.
it's just very interesting. It pulls you into that story. And I think that hip hop is something where I love the variety in it, where you can have something like Kendrick and To Pimp a Butterfly, and then you can have something like Whole Lotta Red.
Yeah.
Completely different in the way that they're trying to approach hip hop. Because Whole Lotta Red, like we said earlier, is something where it's just trying to get you like pumped up and ready. When
Yeah.
then like To Pimp a Butterfly is like you need to like sit down and like listen to it
I know.
as like
It's crazy because To Pimp a Butterfly musically, when I think of something that's heavy, I think of heavy metal and just loud and
yeah.
screaming and all this crazy shit. But then I get to something like To Pimp a Butterfly, and it's contextually so heavy. It's hard
Mhm.
to listen to from beginning to end. Like it's just like
Yeah.
I can't handle this right now.
Especially like you.
Oh,
That
dude, that song, man, he just tears himself
mhm.
apart on that song.
Yeah. And then once you hit, I know you had a very visceral reaction to Mortal Man, I believe, the ending of the album.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The
Like it
ending
hit
is
you
very
really
powerful.
hard with Tupac.
Yeah, yeah, that was
Was that
very
before
powerful.
you listened to Me Against the World or no?
That was so. I listened to Reasonable Doubt, Me Against the World, and there was one other one before To Pimp a Butterfly because people told me Tupac was a big inspiration for Kendrick. You got to at least listen to one of his before moving on. And so, yeah, I had listened to
Okay.
Tupac before.
So that probably made it hit harder.
Oh
One
yeah.
thing he said, like, all my heroes are dead, I think is what he said.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
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 And then the conversation at the end, and eventually, and then Tupac like fades away kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
from the conversation, and it just leaves like it kind of just it's one of those album endings where it's just you finish it and you're just like left there like staring
And that's
because you have like
exactly what
no
happened.
idea what
I
to
was
say.
just
Yeah,
sitting there and
no,
I couldn't say anything. I was trying to think of what I'm supposed to say and I was like, I just didn't have anything to say. And I think I even ended the video like that. Like I don't have anything to say.
yeah, because I think with pre also I want to talk about preconception. Didn't you say I believe in the Tupac video you had some preconceptions about Tupac or something?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
What was your preconception?
So back in the 90s when, he was big and blowing up and stuff, I
Yeah.
was basically a Tupac hater even though I hadn't listened to him. And it was, the standard cliche hater things that you would hear, right? Oh, he's got all these tattoos and his chains and his thug life and his bandana and, oh, all my muscles and I'm a gangbanger. Just all of that typical bullshit, basically. And the ideas, what frustrates me the most about that experience and that mental state were those were not my ideas. They came in from somewhere else. I don't really know
Yeah.
where because I mean, I don't obviously knew nothing about Tupac. I'd never met the guy, I'd never listened to his music. I've seen, you see pictures and shit like that, but it's like
Yeah.
how did I as a teenager develop this idea of a person knowing nothing
Mhm.
about him? Where did these come from? But then the fact that I never explored his music, I never gave him a chance. Those ideas just existed in my head for decades until I finally sat down and listened to his music.
Mhm. I think I kind of had this with Kanye because, well, he's like all in the news. He's probably
Yeah.
like the most talked about rapper publicly
Yeah,
in the
the
news and
the
shit.
media just feeds off him left and right.
Yeah. And so that can really leave you with a bad image of him because like everyone in the news hates him.
You
Like
know,
you
I
read these articles.
I think they seem that way. I honestly think everybody in the news loves him because they know they can talk about him nonstop and just
Well, yeah, he
constantly
can
make
bring
money
in
off of him.
clicks.
Yeah.
He can bring in clicks like
Yeah.
TMZ and stuff.
Yep.
They know they can do anything about Kanye and they'll bring in clicks.
Yep. Yep.
When you actually listen to his music, it can really humanize him, especially because of him talking about his mental health struggles and whatnot,
Yeah.
especially on like Kids See Ghosts or Yay or something like that. And I think what's so interesting about Kanye's albums and is going to like College Dropout or Late Registration and seeing him before everything because like once 808s happens, once his mom died,
Yeah.
and then once the Taylor Swift thing happened for Twisted Fantasy, then everything spiraled,
Yeah.
which is really sad to see because especially like Graduation, he seemed like he was like on top of the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely he was. Yeah.
Yeah. And he just seems so happy in his position. And College Dropout, Late Registration, he seems like almost a different person. And then once you get into Twisted Fantasy, he just sounds so angry. And Yeezus, like he just like goes into this, and you're like, "Who? This is the same kid that was on College Dropout, like rapping about this stuff."
I
It's such an interesting spiral.
I still really hold to the idea that on Pinocchio's story, that's where that Kanye died.
Oh yeah,
the college trilogy Kanye, he died
Mhm.
on that performance, and then the I don't know what you would call because I feel like from Dark Twisted Fantasy and Yeezus, and I haven't gotten into his later stuff obviously, but I feel
Yeah.
like that's another form of Kanye, and then like the present Kanye is even now a different version from the
Yeah.
guy that made Yeezus. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's been a weird experience basically living this guy's life through his music.
Yeah. Pinocchio's story for sure. I feel like not enough people talk about that track. I feel like because it's a live performance, right? Yeah.
It's
Like
a live
it's
performance on
live.
the album, and the audio is pretty poor quality, which to me
Yeah.
gives it more impact because Kanye
Mhm.
feels like he's so far away, just so far away.
Yeah. That's what I realized about the track is that I've heard a lot of people don't like the track, and I think it's because they don't think about it. They're just like, "Oh, this is a bad live audio recording." But when you actually go into it, what I think it's live, the purpose of it being live for is because Kanye on that track is talking about very depressing topics about how he wants to. Well, Pinocchio is like he wants to be a real boy or whatever he's saying, Like he wants to feel like a real person, and then the crowd is just going Kanye,
Yeah,
Kanye,
cheering.
and he feels so distant from the audience
Yeah, because no
in
one's
that.
listening to him at all.
Yeah, no one's realizing his struggles, and they kind of are just feeding into this like ego, kind of like Kanye, Kanye, we love you, and like all this stuff, and he's just talking about like all his struggles, and it's like it's sad
It's extremely sad.
because it feels like someone who's trying to express themselves and say what they're going through, and no one's listening.
No one's listening. No one's listening. No one understands what he's saying. And I think that concept carries into Runaway. I mean, this is what
Yeah.
people have said with when it gets to the back half of that song and the vocals are super distorted and everything. What is it? The Mallory brothers? Somebody put me onto them. And
Was that I love those guys, the two
yeah,
brothers.
they've
Yeah.
got a breakdown where they're talking about that track, and
Mhm.
I'm so glad I had watched it because right before those distorted vocals start, he says, "I'm going to be honest." But when I heard it, it sounded like he said just the piano, and I think I had that in mind because I had watched the 2015 Hollywood Bowl performance, which was actually
Okay, yeah.
before the album came out, so it doesn't make any sense. But and in that performance, he's saying just pianos, just piano. He wants the strings to stop.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
Hmm.
him saying, "I'm going to be honest," and then it turning into this jarbled nonsense that you can't understand is a great way of saying nobody hears what I'm actually saying.
Yeah. Oh, that's actually I never thought about that.
Yeah. And so I hadn't picked up on that. That's why I liked the Mallory Brothers video
Hmm.
because they point that out. And then once that's in mind, it makes a whole lot more sense what's going on in that back half of the song.
Twisted Fantasy is really him just like talking about his downfall almost in that time because everyone hated him after the Taylor Swift thing.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you know about like him going to Hawaii and stuff and everything, right?
Yeah, I saw some of that. I mean, I think it was in the documentary, and I saw some other
Okay, yeah.
videos where he's talking about that. Yeah, he just went to Hawaii, and it was crazy. There was
Yeah.
somebody who was being interviewed talking about the making of the album and how Kanye would get them up in the morning. They'd all go to breakfast together.
Oh yeah.
They'd all
He had like
work
all
out
the rappers
together
there.
and shit. And then it's okay, hit the studio, and they're in the studio for 10 or 12 hours, and then the next day get up and do it again.
And they had like the rules, like no talking. He's like
Yeah.
no going on your phone and all this stuff. He just makes this type of environment. And it was because when you listen to Twisted Fantasy, it does sound like it was made by like a perfectionist.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's
Twisted
really
Fantasy
well
is so
done.
concise
Yeah.
and everything put together. And when you listen to it, it is kind of, especially Lost in the World. What's your take on Lost in the World and what you think that means in context?
I think Lost in the World, especially because there's that supporting chorus or supporting vocals that are saying "Run from the lights, run for your life,"
Yeah.
but the music is so infectious and so toxic and so just enveloping. Well, not toxic, intoxicating.
Yeah, yeah.
And in the video, in the Runaway film, on that part, he's running. He's trying to run as fast as he
Hmm.
can. And I feel like the point of that song is he knows he needs to run from the fame. He needs to run from the spotlight. He needs to get out of this to save his own life. But the music is so consuming and beautiful and alluring. You can't. My wife pointed this out to me when I was doing that album because she said I don't want to dance to it. Like I feel guilty dancing to it because of what the song's about, but the music is so good. And I was like, shit, that's probably it. Like, yeah, it's so
Yeah.
everything about it is just so alluring and pulls you in that even though I know I need to run, I can't.
Yeah, that's kind of because Lost in the World sounds like a dance song
Oh
on
yeah.
the surface.
Oh, dude, it's so catchy. It's so catchy. Like you just
Yeah.
you just start moving to it and you can't help it.
And then Who Will Survive in America after that?
Yeah.
That's like the closer to all the ideas. And I think it's kind of because Kanye left America. Well, not he didn't leave America, but he left like the main areas of it to go to Hawaii.
Yeah.
So it's kind of this idea that who will survive in America when everyone's out to get you, it feels like.
Yeah, I kind of got that impression too. And I started thinking about the ending of that and then some of the ideas he brings into with Yeezus, new slaves and stuff like that. I feel like
Yeah.
Kanye is in this point where, okay, I'm rich, I'm famous, and so I've made it, but I'm still trapped because America is now the trap. Like you just can't get out of this structure that exists.
Because he's famous, but still everyone has their eyes on him. Everything he does is written down, and he can't do anything without people knowing what he's doing. So even though everybody knows him and a lot of people are fans of him and he's very famous and very wealthy, he still feels trapped in this hole where he's like paranoid. Like everybody's watching him.
Well, and I think more so it comes from because throughout all of his music, it's pretty common for him to say, he just wants to have a nice, happy life. And when he lost his mom, that's a big deal. But that closing poem, all I want is a wife and kids and a home and some food to feed them with. And, that's what he wants. And so he's in this weird situation where he has everything, yet he still feels like he doesn't have anything because he doesn't have what he actually wants. He doesn't have that family to just love, What was it? It was Jay-Z who said it I think it's in the Monster track. What's my Achilles heel? Love. I can't get enough of it. And I think you can take that two ways. Like maybe they're talking about, just, sex with beautiful women all the time. But I take it the other way of I need actual real love. That's my weakness. And it's a weakness in the sense that he's so desperate to try and find the real love that he gets misled into shallow, empty relationships that go nowhere because he's trying to find real love. Mm-hmm. So... yeah, I feel like that's really the trap. And then there was another track too. I can't remember which one, but the lyrics were, it's the sunrise or the sunset or something, and he can see all the colors on the horizon, but the girl he's with, she can only see, there's only green in her eyes.
Oh, Devil in New Dress?
Yeah, there's only green in her eyes.
I see green in your eyes. That Devil in New Dress is very interesting. The topics that he brings to that when in relation to the album, where... that's also another thing where it kind of has its own story that we were talking about earlier. Yeah. Where it's this story between him and this girl, and he doesn't feel like he has a good relationship with her. And then you have Rick Ross. That's another thing with hip hop in relation to rock is that rock doesn't have really features as much. No,
they don't. And I feel like hip hop that's an advantage because if you listen to somebody and you go, "Oh, this was cool," but then, "Oh, that guy was really good. Who's that guy?" "Oh." And then you go listen to that album, and then on that album you discover 2 or 3 more artists. You're like, "Oh, who's that?" Mm-hmm. And it's just this chain reaction of listening to multiple people.
That's something I enjoy about hip hop is that it feels like it's like its own space. Yeah. Like when you're in hip hop, it feels like everyone knows each other, and they'll like name drop each other, and they'll be like this guy, and you'll be like, "Who's that?" And then you know who that is, and it feels like it's its own culture. Well, when you.
I was going to say, I used to never really understand it. Like when I was an outsider to it, I would be like, why does anybody even make their own album when it's just everybody on everybody's album? Like it doesn't really make sense. But I think it's more like you say, it's acknowledging a friendship or a bond or something. But two, I found more so, it seems like it's a way to vouch for somebody who's new coming onto the scene, because hip hop does seem to have this weird stigma against new artists. Like, if you're a new artist, you haven't proven yourself, and so I'm not going to listen to you because you're new. It's like for some reason, somehow they have to earn their way into the club, and then, okay, now I'll listen to you, which I think is total bullshit. I don't really get that. I don't know how true that is. I don't want to be pounding on hip hop for something that is not true, but I've gotten that impression. And with rock, nobody really gives a shit. Like, you either made good music or you didn't. That's the only barrier you have to overcome. And if no one's ever heard of you and you put out an album and it's great, everyone loves you. Done. You don't have to prove anything.
I think maybe hip hop has higher standards or something, or maybe it's. Well, I've noticed definitely that hip hop has more in comparison to rock. Hip hop seems to have more fans that are like very like this is my favorite, like very aggressive about their opinions. Yes.
And I think that's the competitive nature of hip hop, which is something I've learned. I've come to understand that's more of a positive than a negative, but I think the competitive nature and this idea of you're competing against the other guys to both, improve yourself and your own skills and to push yourself further, which is a good thing. but there's always the battle for the crown and who's the best rapper and who's put out the hottest album or the best album. But I think that idea, this king of the mountain type of thing, is what pushes other people out because, well, your verse wasn't as good as his verse, and that verse wasn't as good as this verse. So that means, relatively speaking, through the idea of being competitive with each other, that verse is trash, even though that verse is actually pretty good. Like, that verse can stand on its own 2 feet. It's a good verse. The beats are good, whatever. Like, even though the music itself is solid, through this weird ranking competitive system, it gets pushed down.
Yeah. It's because they're comparing it to the Kings.
Right, exactly.
Like, you're going to go, well, you're not as good as Jay-Z.
Yeah.
And like, okay, well, who is, though? Like, you're comparing all these people to these kings that it's like, like, you're saying you're not as good as this guy. Like, how many people are going to be as good as the top?
Yeah. I think it makes a double-edged sword in the sense of, okay, yeah, it pushes everybody further. It pushes everybody to that absolute edge to just make the best music they possibly can, which is a good thing. But then the bad side is that it pushes music that is good down because it's not the best thing I've ever heard. Therefore, it's mid. And of course, if you're mid, which is, by definition, fine. No, you're actually bad.
Yeah. And I feel also with features, what I enjoy about it is it can bring kind of this energy where it's like, it feels like it's they're in like a group and they're like, oh, now you go. Kind of like this energy, especially with Wu-Tang that you're listening to, because it's so many guys, you can like lose track of how many guys in, but it sounds like they're just like in this room, like tearing at it in this one booth almost. I love, they're just like snapping.
Yeah, I loved 36 Chambers. I thought that was a great album, and that one song that really just lit me up so much, Protect Your Neck.
Oh yeah,
because I don't know where it was. Maybe it was. I think it was on the album. There was this part where they're having like an interview skit or something like that, and they're introducing all the members and talking about how they form Voltron and all this stuff. And I, at that point in the album, I was like, this is funny. Just hearing a Voltron reference, and it almost sounds like a PR line, But then when it got to Protect Your Neck, and every guy comes in with his verse, and each verse almost seems like it's better than the previous. And I was like, holy shit, it's happening. They're really like forming this superpower group by way of each person coming in and crushing it.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting to me, groups in hip hop. What other, is that the only group you've listened to? I think Wu-Tang, or have you listened to other groups?
I haven't heard any other groups. Brockhampton gets brought up a lot. I'm going to do Outkast. Tribe Called Quest has been brought up a lot. Outkast, I know that's only 2 people, but I'm going to do their first album next Friday. But I haven't done, and then Odd Future was coming up a lot when I was listening to Tyler.
Oh yeah.
But I haven't. Wu-Tang is the only group I've listened to.
Well, I guess Death Grips is a group technically.
Yeah, technically, sure. But I mean,
other people don't rap on it. It's just him. He just has it's like a band where it's like he's the lead vocalist.
Yeah.
But it's not really a group where on Wu-Tang everyone goes at it.
Yeah, it's fucking incredible. I love it. Mm-hmm. I love it.
That's what's interesting about, because something about Outkast and just these groups in hip hop is that in Outkast, Andre 3000 and Big Boy, because those are the 2 guys, they didn't even know each other when they got together to make Outkast. They barely knew each other, so they didn't really know their talents. Like, they were like 18 or really young. So I find it so interesting that 2 people can come together randomly and they're like insanely talented. And then bring this guy like Brockhampton. I don't know if you know, Brockhampton was on a Kanye forum where on like, I don't think it was Reddit, but it was some website where they were on this Kanye forum, and the main guy said, "Hey, I'm starting a group. Does anyone want to move to California?" And all of the people that responded, he let in, and they made Brockhampton, and all of them were just talented. That's crazy. Made this group, which is insane.
Yeah, that's crazy.
That you can bring together this talent, that's what I find because most cases in rock, most of them are groups usually.
Yeah.
Usually, but most of the time it's just one guy that does the vocals usually. Or you'll have backing vocals from the other
There'll be
people.
some supporting vocals sometimes, but yeah, usually there's the lead singer, and I mean, it's pretty often where the lead singer will only sing. Like some bands, the singer will also play an instrument, usually guitar or bass or something, but typically it's not. It's kind of almost the norm where the singer just sings.
And that's something also different with hip hop is that they make the beat, but it's not like live where they don't have to play anything.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Where they can kind of just go over it. When rock groups usually they record and they sing at the same time. So that's I think also where you can get some good energy from hip hop is that they don't have to focus on doing other things. They can just fully go into what they're trying to say.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a good point, and I think because of that too, you can get more complexity with the lyrics. So yeah, with rock, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the band Rush. Have you heard of them before?
Yeah, I know Rush. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that the bass player is also singing while also doing bits of the keyboard with his feet, it's like, holy shit, man, that's a lot going on right now. That's a lot going on.
And something also I found interesting about rock and hip hop is that hip hop has almost replaced rock as the dominant genre in music now. It seems like for
That's
popularity.
That's what something I was watching was saying. Oh, you know what? I think Fantano actually just did a video on that, talking about rock is dead and how people are saying rock is dead, and
rock's definitely not dead though.
No,
definitely
it's not
dead.
He was
because something's not insanely popular doesn't mean it's dead.
Right. And, you know, that's what he was saying basically, too, is like, yes, hip hop is definitely more popular than rock. And there you go. And there's another documentary called It Might Get Loud. I don't know if you've never seen it, check it out. It's really good. It talks about Jimmy Page, Slash, or not Slash, The Edge from U2 and Jack White from White Stripes.
Yeah.
And it's just like this. It's just a documentary talking about them and stuff. But there's a part on there where the guitarist from U2, The Edge, he's talking about rock and the guitar, and he feels like every now and then it gets to a point where it's like, oh man, all the ideas have been done, everything, it's over, like it's gonna die out, and then all of a sudden it just flares up again. And he said that's just been the history of rock for whatever reason, and it is an interesting space in that I think hip hop has more freedom because they can use more sound, and I feel like in some ways
they're not confined.
Yeah, with rock, sometimes it's like, well, shit, because you're using the same instruments, like, yeah, you can only do so much. Like, eventually you're going to run out of creative space.
Yeah.
But then a band like Tool comes out with their Fear Inoculum album, and they put on a song like Pneuma or Invincible, and you go, oh, shit. No, there's still a lot of room to explore here because... I mean, I'm obviously a Tool fan, as you can tell, and I've loved those guys for 30 years. And the most recent album, the most recent songs they released were some of the best music I've ever heard, ever. It's like, holy shit, man, this is crazy.
That's what I think is that hip hop, I think, has taken over rock because it's more modern feeling, especially with like the slang you said. And everything is that it can kind of also pull people from every side, and there's all types of hip hop where I feel like some people label rock as like, oh, it's too loud, I don't want to be listening to this. And then hip hop, you can listen to it and there's all sides of it. There's you can listen to like Death Grips or something is insane.
Yeah.
Or you can listen to something more chill, like I don't know, like Drake or something. Like you can just listen to something where it's kind of low stakes and you can kind of just sit there and vibe off to it, or you can listen to something insanely deep like To Pimp a Butterfly.
Yeah, and I think that's a slight misconception about rock too, just because I think the idea people have about rock is it's too loud and it's crazy. Mm-hmm. There are some super mellow rock songs out there. I mean, songs from rock groups. When you asked me earlier, some of my top albums, the Alice in Chains EP "Jar of Flies" is pretty chill. I mean, that's a great album, and it's only like a half hour long. I think with hip hop, with it being so popular and just continually growing in popularity, I feel like hip hop has the advantage in that they seem to be faster at putting music together and releasing content. Like some of these rock bands, it's like
They take
three,
like
4 years between
breaks.
albums, and that's kind
Yeah.
of the normal for a rock group to be, because the standard formula is you release an album, you go on tour for a year or two, you take a break, you work on the next album. Well, shit, it's been 4 years, 3 years.
Hmm.
Hip hop, as far as I can tell, that is not the norm. Like you
Yeah, it's like
release,
one a year,
yeah, that's much
one album a
faster.
year.
And
Yeah.
so because of that, they can stay a lot more current with the changes and the evolution. I think hip hop evolves faster
Hmm.
because of that.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I have heard people say it makes music sound dated because you go to listen to something from 10 years ago. Oh, it didn't age well. I hear that a lot. This didn't age well. That didn't age well. This aged better than that. I feel like rock does not suffer from that because
No, I don't think so. Yeah.
rock just focuses on, nope, okay, we're gonna go back into the studio. We as a group have changed in whatever way. We're gonna focus on making a great album, and it's just gonna be that focus, and it's not necessarily a topical relevant issue. It's just making good music, and then it
Yep.
either holds up or it doesn't.
What I think people for rock, mostly what I hear people say is dated in terms of rock is like maybe like I don't know, like Blink 182 or something, or like
Yeah,
early 2000s. But I don't even think I don't really understand what people say doesn't age well because most time when people say this doesn't age well, usually it means it just sounds like a product of the time. But I'm like I kind of find that interesting in a way because I can listen to it and it takes me back to this kind of
yeah.
feeling and culture of the time that's very different from now. I wouldn't really say it hasn't aged well. I guess something couldn't age well if it's like they say a lyric that's not okay
See,
in
and
culture.
yeah, and that's part of it. And it's I think it's a little bit more common for hip hop to have pop culture references, and so once that event has passed, it's kind of like, oh,
Mm,
like the Wu Tang album, the 36 Chambers. I was cracking up over some of the references that were coming up because I was like, holy
yeah.
shit, I haven't heard about these things in 20 years.
Hmm.
When I think of things that sound dated, I sometimes think about the earlier Metallica albums, which I like. But Metallica is an interesting metal band in the sense that they've got their early work, and you can really hear the singer's voice evolve.
Yeah.
And some of the recording quality that exists, you can hear the recording quality change as well. And so there's almost like time eras that exist within Metallica's discography because
Yeah.
of that. Like if you listen to Ride the Lightning, it sounds a certain way, but then if you put on the Black Album, it sounds totally different. Even though I mean the songs are clearly very different style as well. But
Hmm.
then if you put on, Saint Anger, when they're trying to use their fucking software to record, it just kind of sounds like shit. Yeah, like
Yeah.
everything's kind of tinny and topped out and for whatever reason. But
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, I also kind of wonder sometimes what people mean when something didn't age well. But
Yeah.
I think it folds into the idea of how hip hop evolves, and so certain albums like Illmatic or 36 Chambers, where the lyrical skill is just so on point, it doesn't really matter. Like the rest of it doesn't matter.
Mhm.
But as hip hop has evolved and maybe lyrical flow changes, and like that's popular at the time, but then it shifts over here and it shifts over here. 10 years later, you go back and you go, well, yeah, that was then. This is now.
Hmm. And that's not always a bad thing, really.
Not necessarily, but I think it's something you can notice more in rap versus rock. Everyone's just trying to
Well,
rock.
yeah.
So, nobody goes back and goes, oh man, that drum fill, that's how everybody did their drum fills back in the day. And we don't do that
Yeah.
anymore. So that sounds dated. Like, no, everybody has their own style, their own sound, and they're just trying to do it
Mhm.
as well as they can.
Something also I want to do a comparison. When I was talking about To Pimp a Butterfly and how lyrically deep it is, I also want to mention some rock albums I feel are also very deep in that way and lyrically. So I'd say, have you listened to Remain in Light by Talking Heads?
No, I've not listened to Talking Heads. No.
Okay, so that's the one with Once in a Lifetime on it, and that album delves into so many. It's only 40 minutes long, and it's like 8 or 9 songs.
Okay.
But it's really about like the political climate at that time, and it's a very conceptual album, and the final track brings everything together. Like one of the songs is about like a bombing in Africa where this guy
Oh wow.
suicide bombed something, and it just brings all these topics together. Like the last track, I believe, let me check. Yeah, it's called The Overload, where a lot of the album is talking about how like it feels like, which is very relevant today. This album came out in 1980, and it's talking about how we have an overload of information,
Oh
and
shit.
we have an overload of too much stuff happening in the world. I'm like, this is aged very
Right.
well, considering now we have like the fucking internet,
Yeah. Yeah.
which you just get everything thrown at you all the time.
Yeah. Whether you want it or not, here it comes.
Yeah, like if you jump on like I don't really use Twitter anymore because it's just like too.
It's
I don't
awful.
like Twitter.
Awful. Twitter's
Yeah.
fucking terrible. I hate it.
Yeah,
I hate Twitter.
I hate Twitter. And you go on Twitter and like you'll just like get hit with every like God forbid you go to like the political side of Twitter.
Oh, I won't.
It's
I won't. Yeah.
awful.
No.
It's so bad. You get hit with so much stuff and you don't know what to believe. You're like, what is all this? So the fact that they were saying that in the 80s, I'm like, God,
Yeah.
it's so much worse now.
Yeah.
Now that you have this. And another album that's lyrically deep, I would say the Downward Spiral you were
Oh
talking
fuck
about.
yeah! I was hoping you were
Yeah.
gonna say that.
Downward Spiral is insane in terms of that's really just about the downward mental spiral of a person.
And it's kind of a tough one because on the surface level, it doesn't necessarily seem like there's a story being told. You kind of have to read between the lines a bit because each
Yep.
track's so many of the songs stand alone so well. So you can just, oh, that was a cool song. Oh, that was a cool song. It's kind of easy to miss the subtle links that exist. But when you go from beginning to end and you kind of zoom out a little bit and go, oh, yeah, this is a downward spiral for sure.
Yeah, especially when like Eraser,
Uh-huh.
which I love that
Oh,
track.
my God, that's such a great
Eraser's
song.
insane. And then Hurt, especially the ending,
Yeah.
the closer,
Yeah.
is like very just everything put together. It's like so sad.
Yeah.
And everything put together, that's one where it just feels very, very. That's also an album that feels very planned out,
Yeah.
where they
Yeah.
knew everything going in. They were like, yeah, because a lot of albums you can listen to and it kind of feels like they just threw like tracks together, like, oh, this would be cool.
That's the typical rock experience. It's just, yeah, here's a bunch of good songs. And, we try and put it in an order that makes sense in terms of just the listening experience.
Yeah.
But, yeah, there aren't a whole lot of stories being told throughout an album. I mean, Pink Floyd does it pretty well with The Wall. And
Yeah.
even Animals. Animals is a good kind of story with the three different animals. But, yeah.
Because
it's-
Animals is like 4 tracks, right? Or like 5 tracks.
Yeah, it's 5 songs, and 2 of
Yeah.
them are like a minute and a half piece. The other 2, I think Dogs is 17 minutes, Sheep is 15, and Pigs is 13 or something like that.
And it's
Like,
mostly instrumental, right?
for the most part, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
But
that
they
album.
can still convey that story,
Yeah. Oh
which
yeah.
is interesting.
If you read the lyrics, you and then you kind of piece it together. You go, oh, okay, because there's wolves, there's pigs, and there's sheep.
Also with I will say something I want to touch on. What is, you think, an album in history from rock that you feel is overrated in the grand scheme?
I never really know how to answer those questions because I don't spend a lot of time listening to other people's opinions.
Yeah.
So like, I listen to music and an album or a song will exist in its own space for me, and I just go, okay, well that's where it is. I've seen people try and say that Dark Side of the Moon is overrated, but I don't agree with that. I think Dark Side of the Moon, whether or not it's your favorite Pink Floyd album, which it's not my favorite Pink Floyd album, but that album for that band at that time was huge. I mean, that's what blew them up. And it's an incredible piece of work. And even the album itself is so iconic. The cover, people know the cover without even knowing the band. And I mean, it existed on the number 1 slot for fucking ever. I mean, that was a monster of an album. But I've heard people try and say that's an overrated one. Metallica fans love to shit all over the Black Album.
Really?
Oh yeah, because
Why?
well, it's because the first 4 prior albums were completely different from the Black Album. They were long songs and they were heavy and they weren't radio friendly. And so the Black Album, they sold out and all this other shit.
Oh, they think it's too mainstream?
Yeah, I think that opinion has faded away. But I remember in the 90s, people were like, what the fuck, man? This is bullshit. Yeah. And that was kind of ridiculous.
I might say, honestly, I just listened to this recently. I might say Nevermind by Nirvana.
I forget about that album because I'm not a huge Nirvana fan, and I'm glad you brought that up because I feel that's an overrated album in the sense that when it comes to grunge, I thought Alice in Chains, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Stone Temple Pilots, I thought those guys did it better than Nirvana.
Yeah. Nirvana just kind of like blew it up.
They blew it up, and I don't want to try and take anything away from them, but yeah, I was just not a huge Nirvana fan. Ironically, the one I liked for them the most was In Utero, which is an album they tried to make in order to piss off their fans. Like, it's just loud and distorted and noisy. Yeah, like they tried to like shove people away with that album, and that was the one that drew me in because like, this is really good. But one of the songs is called Radio Friendly Unit Shitter. And it's just loud and distorted and noisy and awful, and people are supposed to hate it, but with it being called that, I love that song.
Yeah. There's also, isn't there literally a song in there called Rape Me?
Yep. That's a classic one. And there's a great story with that because there was some show, actually I think it was MTV, they invited them on to play for the awards or something, and they were all excited, and for whatever reason they hadn't specifically told them which song to play. They all just assumed they would play
like Smells Like Teen Spirit.
Yeah, and so Kurt Cobain goes out there, he's on the stage, it's live, and he starts the opening strum for Rape Me. And then he's going, and then he just kind of stops and looks at the camera and then changes to Smells Like... I don't remember what song they played, but he did not play the song, but it was like everyone was for a second like, oh shit.
Yeah.
I mean, Nirvana was cool, but I loved Alice in Chains. I loved Soundgarden, especially that first Soundgarden album. Oh my God, Bad Motorfinger was incredible. Heavy. Fuck, man. You listen to Jesus Christ Pose, and it's like, what is going on?
That's something. Also, the side of rock that I really enjoy, like I said, with hip hop in comparison, is just like where it's just supposed to get you pumped up or get you ready. Like I said, have you listened to Is This It by The Strokes?
No.
The Strokes are kind of a group where it's just you kind of just listen to it and like have a great time. Where I know you said which group would you say exudes that the most for you? Where it's just you don't really have to focus on it and you can just kind of like
and just go nutso with it.
Yeah.
God, I mean, Sepultura always comes to mind because they're just so loud. They're so loud, and I love it. Oh, there's another one too, Electric Wizard, which is just super, super heavy stuff. But Sepultura always comes to mind. If I put on Roots, man, that album, oh my God, it's like lighting a bonfire with gasoline. You know, you just pour gasoline and then throw a match, and the whole thing takes off. I love that album.
I feel that music can do this thing where it can exist in which I find interesting when comparing rock and hip hop. It can exist in so many different planes where you can have this type of music. You can have this sound. You can have this sound. You can have this sound and this sound. But they can overlap so easily.
Yeah.
Which I find interesting, like what I was talking about earlier. Because I find something like Death Grips to kind of be the equivalent to the heavy metal in rock for hip hop.
Yeah, I agree with that. I've only heard one album, but yeah, I agree with that.
Where also something that I find interesting about Death Grips, I was saying, is that it's very loud and you can easily just rock out to it, but also the lyrics on that album are heavy. On The Money Store. Yeah,
The Money Store was fucking, some of it was hard to follow, man. Like, it's a little cryptic.
People had to abstract.
Yeah, people had to explain it to me because it was hard to understand just exactly what the lyrics were talking about. Like, I think the opening track is written backwards, like yeah, it's written backwards. It's like, this is trippy.
Because you can easily like have like go crazy to get got, or like I've seen footage.
Oh yeah, I've
But
seen footage is great. Hacker I love too. Bitch
yeah,
Please is
Hacker's
a great
great.
one. Yeah,
But
Death
they do
Grips.
have some like interesting lyrical ideas. Especially Hacker
Yeah,
is also very lyrically dense, where it's like very abstract. You're like, what the fuck? Where I think he was talking about, I think on there's a line where he goes, the tables flipped. Now we got all the coconuts, bitch.
yeah. There's so many times I'm like, I don't know what he's talking
Yeah,
about.
but it feels like he means something. Like you know that it's because if they're putting, it doesn't feel like he's just throwing random words out there.
You know,
It all feels
it's
like he's making a statement.
yeah, it's definitely on purpose. It's a challenge.
Hmm.
It's just like I did Telephone, the album Telephone, and by No Name. And she's got
Yeah.
great lines, but some of the lines I'm like, I don't know exactly what this means. I know it feels like it's on purpose, is with intent, but I
Yeah.
don't know what the intent is.
Hmm.
So
Do
Mark, we're at an hour and five.
yeah.
We've
Hmm.
blown through. I'm surprised. Like this is, you know, it's a good conversation when an hour just goes by
Yeah.
like that. You know.
Hmm.
So I think this was a lot of fun. But do you have
Yeah.
anything you would like to wrap up with here as we close?
Um. Let me like recommend an album or something.
Well, I mean, you can, but my list is just so ridiculous. It's like throwing a
No, I'm
tick.
just saying to people in
Okay, yeah,
general.
yeah, go for it, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, people, I would say listen. I'll do one rock and one hip hop since
Okay.
we were talking. And this one necessarily isn't rock, but there's an album, I don't know if you've heard this, called A Crow Looked at Me by Mount Erie.
No,
So,
I don't know that one.
this album is about this he was in the group The Microphones, which I don't know if you know the Microphones.
No, I don't know them either. No.
He, this is an album where his wife passed away in real life because of cancer,
Okay.
and that the album, I think he wrote it like weeks after she died, like it's right after she died,
So
and the album is just
still fresh and
yeah,
raw, huh?
and it sounds like he's just like recording in like his attic or something, where it's not really that like studio.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like he recorded in a studio, and the lyrics are so devastating, where I don't know which song it is, but his wife he like took his wife's ashes and he threw them in the sea, and he was like with his daughter. Yeah, it was a daughter, and they were on like the boat watching the ashes in the ocean, and I think like the daughter asked him, "Does mom swim?" or something,
Oh God.
and it's messed up. And then there's like I think the first track is um after she died, a backpack arrived at the house because she had ordered a backpack for their kid to start school. So he says like there's a line where it says like you were preparing for a life you knew you wouldn't be a part of,
Wow.
which is just it's so devastating. And
Yeah,
then
that sounds great. That sounds like a great pick me up here for Sunday morning.
yeah. Yeah. Then a rap one I would recommend. Let me think of. I would recommend. I don't know. A lot of people aren't really that much of a fan of Chance the Rapper. You know Chance the Rapper. I'm guessing you've heard of him.
Yeah, his name's been brought up. He's been recommended. He's on my
Yeah,
list.
but I would say because spring. Oh, today's the first day of spring too.
Yeah.
Today's the first day of spring. Coloring Book by Chance the Rapper is actually a great pick me up album that you were saying, where it's actually like just a feel good album.
Oh, okay.
So that's what I'd recommend for spring.
All
And
right.
yeah, because first day of spring. So even though it's pretty shit outside right now, it was just like raining all day. But yeah, do you have anything else to add?
Not really, man. That was a kind of a wild conversation. We were all over the place. It was cool.
Yeah.
I was thinking about it though. At one point, I was like, "God, this is gonna be hard to put timestamps to because we're just left and right, man." Which is
Oh
great.
yeah.
I mean, that's a sign of a great conversation, in my opinion. But you know, poor me, I have to add timestamps.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Mark, dude, that was great. I appreciate it. Thanks for being on, and everybody who's watching, I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Yeah.
And we will definitely see you guys again next week.
Yeah.